Alright, this is a review for the Punisher Max omnibus, which is written by Jason Aaron and drawn by Steve Dillon. Um, and I've been kind of going through a Jason Aaron kick for the last couple of months, getting caught up on some things, and this is probably the most unique thing that I have seen him write for Marvel. Um, I'm not going to show the inside of this because there's some pretty fucked up shit in here, but trust me when I say that it's good. Um, Garth Ennis is kind of the paragon to go to of one of the best Punisher writers that there is. Um, since the character has shown up in season 2 of Daredevil, he's Marvel has reprinted the entire collection of Ennis's Punisher Max. Um, they're up to the Slaver story arc right now, so there's 2 complete collections out, and there should be 2, maybe 3 more coming by the end of this year. But for the time being, I would recommend this wholeheartedly. It is perhaps the best take on the Punisher that I have read in a long time, and in some areas, I would dare call it better than what Garth Ennis did with the character. Basically, what we got going on in this is that Frank is back in New York, and we're deciding to tackle the Kingpin of Crime story, and there's a lot of Daredevil stuff that's thrown into this mix. At first, I was put off by it a little bit, but as you get to reading the story, you kind of get drawn into it, and there are some really interesting alternate takes on a lot of these characters. Elektra, not so much, but with the Kingpin and Bullseye, definitely there are some new takes on them. Basically, what this is that there's a meeting of a lot of the mob bosses, and they have just been putting up with Frank taking out a lot of their guys for the last 30 years. So, one of their enforcers is like a very low-level enforcer named Wilson Fisk. Comes up and says, "Hey, why don't you give this guy a figurehead to go after? You know, we've always had that there was a Kingpin of Crime myth going for a long time, so why don't you just actually make a fucking figurehead and have Frank go after him?" And Wilson volunteers for this, and it kind of takes off from there in a really dark take, and I could say that, there's a lot of dark stuff in this, but the path that Wilson goes into actually getting up into power, and there's just kind of a point where he stops being a figurehead and actually does become the Kingpin of Crime, takes out all the mob bosses, and just takes over the entire crime echelon in New York, which is really good. Let's see. There's some compares and contrasts that you can do in between Frank and Wilson in this, as to, Frank had something horrible happen to him, and, he chose to use that to become the Punisher, even though there's a lot of innocent stuff which kind of states that this kind of psyche might have already been there before. That was kind of a very small area that Ennis touched on in the Punisher Born series, and it's something that Jason Aaron uses to kind of get into Frank's psyche and basically just deconstruct the character in a way that we have not seen before. The stuff with Wilson Fisk in this is like the first 5 issues. There's 22 issues to this, and you can either find it in this or you can find it in 4 trades, which are Kingpin, Bullseye, Homeless, and Frank. The Kingpin story arc is kind of the weakest of this so far. It's a very quick read, but it is the weakest out of all these 4 story arcs. The series really doesn't hit an interesting stride until we get Bullseye introduced into this. And this is definitely the most fucked up that I've seen the character written. This is a Bullseye that really makes my stomach turn when I'm reading him. and this is a uniqueness that the character in the 616 never had, and the way that he gets inside Frank's head and actually goes to fuck with him is brilliant. Um, Bullseye is basically introduced into this, and the Kingpin hires him to go after Frank Castle, but what Bullseye does instead is he's kind of concerned about, why Frank is the way that he is and why he's so unstoppable. And Bullseye actually goes and holds himself up in a room. He actually finds where the home where Frank's family was living when they were killed, and he goes and he locks himself up in there for a long time and kind of just goes and gets inside this guy's head about why he finally snapped. There's some stuff in here that's kind of black humorous funny. The way that he kind of gets himself into the mind of what Frank was like as a family man, which doesn't really bode well because there are at least 4 or 5 instances where he does take families hostage, and it's fucked up. But there is some part of you that's kind of laughing at it, like you would laugh at the Joker in some of the Batman stories. And it's really, really messed up. The fight between Frank and Bullseye in this, when they finally do get, because there's like this kind of slow burning build up to when these two actually do face each other, and when it finally does happen, it's just all over the fucking place. Bullseye kind of reaches that paramount of what happened to Frank, and when he finally figures out that epiphany, he goes after Frank in such a way, and the fight, which takes some very violent and, in one instance, probably one of the grossest things that I've read out of the Max line that happens in the course of that fight. He tells what he figured out to Frank, and it's something that just completely snaps the character and just sends him into a downward spiral. And it changes the Punisher throughout the course of the story, or for the rest of it, for that matter. We see Frank broken in this story in a way that I have not for a long time. With the way that the character was written in the Marvel Universe, and even kind of the way that he was written in the Max line, there are particular lines that he does not cross. Especially concerning crooked cops. He will not kill crooked cops. But there's kind of a point in this story to where he finds one that does, that is, in fact, in a Wilson Fisk's pocket, and there's kind of a point to where he's really having a hard time straddling that line about wanting to take down the Kingpin, but it's this line that he won't cross. And it's not so much the fact that he does cross it as to what happens to push him over the edge for that. And he's just a completely different character for the rest of the story. With Elektra in this, because I did say that Elektra does come into this, she is very different than what we've seen her written, besides her just being an evil assassin working for the Kingpin. There is another angle to this story that kind of concerns Vanessa Fisk, about how she was left damaged after what Wilson gave up in order to kind of just go after that power that he wanted. And it's all just something that kind of spirals up to a hell of an ending in this, and it's really good. The art in this by Steve Dillon, I haven't really talked about. Dillon's artwork is good for these types of stories. He's not my favorite type of artist in a lot of other stories that don't at least have some kind of twisted humor to them, or it's art that really works in a story where the writer writes the main character as being some kind of smart and everyone else around them seems kind of stupid, especially given for the facial expressions that he draws on a lot of people. It works in this story. The ending of this this is basically the last Punisher story out of the Max line that you're going to get. Unless Ennis wants to come back and tell any more of the untold tales of the Punisher, this is probably some of the best stuff that you're going to get with the Punisher out of this line. And in some areas, to me, it does surpass what Ennis did with the character. You can find it in this, you can find it in the 4 trades. Either way it goes, I do recommend this story, and this is probably going to be some of the best Jason Aaron Marvel stuff that you read, mostly because he does not have any kind of constraints to him when he's telling a story. So he just has a little bit more of quote-unquote free reign in this to kind of tell it the way that he wants to. But yeah, I babbled enough about this. I recommend it.